Welcome to the Oxygen webinar. I'm Noel, and this is my wife, Karissa.
Hey guys.
We're so excited to be able to share with you on this really important topic. Each month we bring a different topic, and I think every month they just get better and better. But if there is one topic that I think makes it or breaks it for every relationship, it is the topic of forgiveness. It is not the easiest topic, but is one that I think as we look at the many couples that we serve across the country, the ones who get this right are the ones that ultimately are able to heal and move forward in their relationship. So we want to take some time to tell you about our own story of forgiveness and what that looks like, and then really to level set on some, I think, misconceptions around forgiveness, what it is, what it's not, and then a process of actually how to move through that as a couple.
Yeah. So we're excited to be here. Thanks for taking the time to join us. And we want to thank the USO also for just sponsoring this webinar and making it possible to send out to our active military out there. Thank you so much for all that you do and for your service. So we're excited to be with you.
Yeah, so I think we'll just start with one of our own personal stories on this topic. When it comes to forgiveness, I think we both know the value of it. We know how powerful it is, but I'll tell you, it is stinking hard to do. There is so many times when I know that I'm the offender, I'm the one that's hurt her, and yet I'm still arguing from a place of, well, she needs to be the one that forgives. And this recently happened. I was traveling, I was gone, and I came home, and I remember just this feeling of like, I want to connect, and she was, up to here with, managing kids, our home, her own business, and I found myself in this place of kind of being critical about the needs that I had, and kind of going there with her on certain things that had been missed along the while I was gone. And I remember I could see I'd hurt her deeply, and it took me I think some time to process like just how much I had hurt her, and I had to come to you and say, I'm so sorry. And it's amazing because in that moment, as much as I knew I needed to do it, everything inside me was like, no, but there's reasons why I don't need to forgive. And ultimately, having asked for that, it was one of those things where it helped us move on past the situation.
You mean don't ask for forgiveness? Yeah. And I think sometimes too that we can, the key thing in a relationship is just to be really quick to forgive, to recognize when those moments happen, to process internally, do whatever you need to do, but be really quick to turn back and circle back around and say, hey, this hurt, and talk it through, because the longer you let things go, the more it hurts you. And there's an amazing quote by William Blake that says, it's easier to forgive your enemy than it is your friend. And your spouse is your best friend, and it's so much more hurtful. Like 5 people could do something to me and it honestly wouldn't matter much, but if Noel did the same, it would be pretty hurtful, because whoever had the saying of, sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you. Anybody who's married knows that's not true. Words do hurt, and we, at times when we're tired, when we're hangry, when we're whatever, we can use them in a way that hurts each other, the person that's closest to us that we love the most. So forgiveness is so crucial to relationships. So today we just want to spend some time talking to you about what it is and what it isn't, and then just the power of forgiveness. And I'm going to share a personal story from my life, but we just thank you for being courageous and for showing up and realizing that this is so much more. Don't you think that forgiveness is so much more about us than it is really even about the person that we're forgiving? Because if we don't forgive,
yeah,
you don't feel like that?
It's so true. And I think, there's like statements that we've heard growing up that we've all kind of adopted as not necessarily truths, but they're just kind of like statements that we go, oh yeah, like the one that says forgive and forget, right? How many times have we heard that statement shared? I remember hearing that for the first time and thinking, oh, that's how it works. Like you forgive and forget. But then you do life together with a couple and someone that's very, very close to you, and that that's not true. Like that's the idea of just forgetting is not going to happen. Now, can you forgive? Absolutely. And I think so we want to debunk some of the myths around forgiveness and what is forgiveness and what's not.
Yeah. And so just to start out, we want to start with what it's not, because I think that's an easy place to start. And forgiveness is just what Noel just said. It's not about forgetting. You're not going to be able to forget. When you get deeply wounded about something, honestly, it's kind of insulting for somebody to even say that, because you're not going to forget that. It hurt at a core level. And it's really important for you to take that in, to let it rest and reside. And it's okay for you to feel those feelings. So, but what's not okay is to let it stay there, to let bitterness creep in and hurt and everything else that comes along with holding that inside. So I think that that would be the first thing, is that it's okay that you're not going to forget. It's just dealing with the emotions and freeing yourself up so you can move forward from there.
Yeah, and I think along those lines is it's not about bearing your emotions. I think so often we think that if I've truly forgiven, the emotion's not going to be there anymore. And the reality is that depending on how deep the hurt is, how much you felt betrayed in the moment, that hurt could go very, very deep. And to think you can just bury it and move on, you're not in touch with reality. And I think secondarily, you're kind of short-circuiting the process of working through forgiveness.
Yeah. And I think having grace with yourself and realizing that this is not a sprint, this is a marathon, and it might be a lifelong marathon where you're going to have to forgive over and over and over for the same thing, because some things that happen to us in a marriage or in life are just hard, and they hurt and they cut really deep, and we will carry that scar with us forever, but it can be healed. And part of that healing is just choosing on a regular basis to say, I'm choosing to move forward. And that's what we kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other part of this is realizing that forgiveness is not about accepting unhealthy behavior, right? Some people feel like, man, if I got to walk in forgiveness with my spouse, and yet there's emotional abuse going on, or even physical abuse. And I can tell you right now, that is not forgiveness. You do not need to stay in a place where you're accepting unhealthy behavior in the relationship. Counter to that would be actually setting the boundary and saying, you know what, I'm not going to tolerate this. And that's completely separate to this process of forgiveness. So keeping that in mind, I think, is super important, depending on what type of relationship you're in.
And I think it's also crucial in forgiveness to step back and process and see all sides. Like in that moment with Noel when he came home, and we have 4 kids. I have 3 boys and a little girl, so it's always crazy at the Meador home. Yes, he's always walking into a lot. No matter how hard I try to have the house clean and things together, it's constant. It's an avalanche. You're just constantly trying to get on top of it. And so what I did, and what I tend to do in our relationship when I get hurt, is I start to withdraw and maybe get a little bit snippy. And so I started to kind of snip back at him a little bit because I was hurting. And so I had to step back and say, when he asked for forgiveness of me, say, okay, you know what? I have to own my behavior too. I am a part of this process, and no person stands alone. And this is a 2-way street. So I owned the part that contributed to him further feeling upset and hurt when he got home.
Yeah. So what is forgiveness? I mean, I think we've covered some of the what it's not, and hopefully that gives some clarity in your relationship. But what is it? And I think the big thing that we want to make sure it gets across in this webinar is that forgiveness is a process. It is absolutely a process. It's not a one-time event. I remember sitting with a couple who had dealt with infidelity in their relationship, and the guy saying he said these words. He said, you know what? I said I'm sorry when that happened. And this was, a number of months prior. And his wife just being so broken from the fact that she was still processing through the hurt, the offense, the betrayal that she had experienced. And him thinking that, well, I did it way back then. It was a one-time event that I said, sorry, we should be good. We should just be moving on. And there's one thing that we've learned in our relationship, that this is a process. Depending on how deep the hurt goes, you can't just relegate it to, I said it and now we're good.
So just kind of talking more about what is forgiveness, and the best way that I've heard it described that I think is so powerful is forgiveness is to not forgive is to lock yourself in a cage, and you have the key. And so it's like asking for a key when you have it in your hand the whole time. And so what it is it's bringing your freedom for yourself, and not necessarily giving that person, you're not saying to them, hey, what you did to me was okay. What you did to me didn't hurt like hell, hasn't affected my life in many ways. But I am, for my sake, going to forgive you, to choose to forgive you, for me, for my heart to be free and be able to move forward.
Yeah, I think another analogy that I've heard, I think is powerful, is that it's like taking poison, and you, in a sense, are hoping that the poison's going to hurt them, when in fact the only one that's being hurt in that process is you. And the realization that, man, I carry the power of being able to set myself free so often is the starting point in this process.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is realizing that forgiveness is this process, but it also isn't something that can be harbored for a later time. And what I mean by that is oftentimes someone can say, I'm going to ask for forgiveness, I'm going to extend forgiveness, but then down the road, they find themselves holding that over their partner's head as a way of kind of, once again, holding them hostage over the behavior that happened, a number of days or even months prior.
Yeah, and I think the key with that, you guys, is the motive behind why you're bringing it up. Because if something big has happened in your relationship where you're hurt, obviously you're going to need to talk about it more. You're going to need to, with that instance that Noel talked about with infidelity, he was asking for forgiveness often because she needed to have it just for the trust to get built back up. So it's recognizing that, like, yes, we're going to have to talk about it, but how you talk about it and how you bring it up is so crucial. So I would say if you're going to revisit something that you've forgiven is to let them know so they can have time to prep and say, hey, I'm wanting to circle back and talk about this. When would be a good time? So respectfully put that forward. And then when you have it, it's never with the heart and the intention to be like, you did this to me, you need to pay. That's not forgiveness. Forgiveness is, hey, I know we walked through this. I'm still suffering in this way. Can we press through and talk more about it? That's forgiveness.
Yeah. So a process, I think it's a decision. It's not an emotion. So often I think we will think that, man, if I'm ready to forgive, it's going to be based on my emotions, which there is an element of that, but really it comes down to, at some point, there's a realization that, man, this is a decision I need to make for myself to be able to walk in freedom, to walk in wholeness. And when you make that, it's amazing how it really will not only move your whole relationship forward, but personally, it has an impact on you personally in terms of that freedom that you're able to walk in. So a decision, not necessarily based on an emotion.
Yeah. And I think one example of forgiveness in my life that I've actually been dealing with recently has been my grandmother just passed away. And growing up, starting from a very young age, I was mistreated by my grandmother, where she would pull my hair, call me a brat, give my brother presents, not give them to me, hide things from me, but give them to him, invite him to go do special things and not me. And I just remember being a very young kid and being like, why? Like, what's wrong? Why don't you love me in the same way? And trying to get that approval and trying to get her to love me and not understanding why she didn't. And this went on for years and years and years until I was 13. And when I was 13, I went to a conference and they talked about forgiveness and they talked about locking yourself up in that cage. And something just broke in me. And I finally was like, okay, I have to forgive, because at this point, like I almost have hate in my heart towards this person. And this is only holding me back from being all that I can be in life. And so I chose to forgive at that point when I was 13. And it was so cool because like a year later, she came to visit us and I looked her in the eye and I told her I loved her. And I meant it 100% when I said it. And I knew she wouldn't say it back. Here's the thing, because she wasn't going to say it back. But I said it to her, and there was such a true love that came in that moment. And sorry, get a little emotional on this one, but she just passed away. And right before she passed away, we went to visit with our kids, and I was snuggling with her on the bed. She couldn't communicate a lot. And I said, Grandma, I love you. And you guys, I heard like this little whisper that said, I love you. And at 37 years old, I finally heard from my grandma words that I'd hoped to hear my whole life. But I was free, and I had already forgiven her a long time ago. And here's the crazy thing, you guys, is that I learned that she had, as a child, a mom who was very hard on her. She did not get a lot of love. She did not receive a lot of affection. So she was just living out what she knew to be true for herself. And the whole time, it wasn't even about me. It was about her. And so that was also just such a freeing thing, but it was also good to see that process that I had gone through and being able to truly forgive, because there's such power in forgiveness. And for what it allowed me, it was like a barrier in my life that I just couldn't move through. And once I did, forgiveness now has become a lot easier, because when you can forgive something like that, it makes it a lot easier to forgive little things that happen in your marriage and your life. So,
yeah. So I think there's two sides of this forgiveness. There's one of it is receiving forgiveness, and then there's also asking for forgiveness. In any relationship, it goes both ways. And we want to cover in the next couple of minutes what we think are some steps, some necessary steps to get that right, so that it's not just this. Sometimes I think we relegate to forgiveness as like, if I hurt you, well, then here's my apology, right? It's kind of like, if this happened, then I'll, and there's not that sincerity of like, man, I understand the weight of how I hurt you. And here's why I'm being sincere in terms of asking for forgiveness. That's such a difference in terms of the impact on a relationship. So let's just start with maybe not so much asking for it, but receiving it. Because when you've been hurt, and if depending on the betrayal, whatever that might look like, that can be really tough to receive. So some steps to be able to do that. I think the first one is to be able to get in touch with the hurt, the offense, the betrayal, just knowing where that sits in your heart. Like, what does that look like? That's a really good starting point. Be in touch with the emotion that's around it.
I think also too, very rarely in relational transactions and when emotions get big or when things happen, is it really about that moment? A lot of times there is a lot going on in that person that's causing, he was exhausted coming home from a trip, and here I was with kids. So it was causing that kind of moment in our marriage to hit. And just having that perspective that this is about the behavior right now that we're talking about. I'm not going to generalize about that. This is who that person is. I think really being careful in a relationship in general, but especially with forgiveness, try to not generalize and make generalizations. Talk about the specific issue of hurt, an area that has occurred.
Yeah, and I think along with that, as you begin to be able to separate those two things out, you actually are releasing the power and control over the situation in your life. And I think that's another big part as that process unfolds, not allowing the power of whatever that moment was to dictate your future as a couple or even as an individual. That's another big part of this process of receiving it from your partner.
I think another big thing too with forgiveness that I have seen play out is that you may forgive, but then you'll bring it up maybe in front of people, or you'll say something to your spouse at a different time. I think like really truly like honoring that, like you're gonna let that go is big, because that's again not really forgiveness if you're bringing it up in front of people, or and also even talking to other people, because I know for certain personality styles you're kind of more process life through people. That would be me, my hands raised. But if you're continue to talk about that issue, but you've had forgiveness in your marriage and you're calling your mom and your aunt and your sister to chat with them about it, that's not forgiveness, and that's not giving a platform in your marriage for true freedom to be in that area.
I think the other one is kind of a no-brainer, but honestly, I've seen this where the person who's been offended or hurt will make a decision consciously, like, I'm going to forgive, and they'll tell their friends, they'll tell their mom, their everyone but their partner of this decision. And it's almost like they've internalized it for themselves and they've shared it with everyone else, but their partner's still kind of like, man, I don't know where we stand on this. So it's kind of no brainer, but man, make sure that you share your decision to forgive with your partner. Yeah.
And I'm not saying don't have people in your life that you talk to, but make sure that you and your partner have kind of like chatted about that and been like, I need to process this a little bit more, and I'm going to talk with so-and-so. The best person to always process that with is a third-party counselor that you're going to, and both perspectives and both sides can be heard as you process through, especially if the wound's especially deep.
Yeah. So those are just some, I think, great tips if you're the one that's needing to receive forgiveness. On the other hand, when it comes to asking for forgiveness, there's a whole different, I think, challenge that's in front of you, because again, this is a process. It's not a one-time decision. So the first thing I would say is identify the issue. Like, what is it that I'm actually specifically asking for forgiveness? The blanket statement of, you know what, I just forgive me because I, suck as a husband. That's probably not going to hit the mark quite right. Although for some I'd be like, yep, yeah, you did actually hit the mark. But identify the issue. What is it specifically? I'm sorry I hurt you because I was critical of you the other night. Like, what is that specific
thing?
thing?
Let's use this. We're going to use an actual real example, if that's okay. Let's use Mary and Ted. And Mary and Ted just had a big fight. And during that fight, some cuss words and some hurtful words were said to each other. So, and it was from Mary toward Ted.
Okay, so am I Ted?
You're Ted, I'm Mary.
Right, here we go.
And so Mary needs to ask forgiveness for using hurtful words during that. So the first thing she's going to do is come to Ted and say, Ted, I'm so sorry. I realized that I used language and hurtful words towards you during our interaction the other night, and I could see it really hurt you. I just want to say that I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, which then I think another step in this process is to recognize the hurt. How did my actions make you feel? right? And we can forget the feeling aspect of this and just call out the actual name, whatever, like, I use cuss words or whatever, but the feeling behind it is much more powerful. And oftentimes the weight of it is right there.
Yeah.
So in this situation,
I would say, Ted, how did that make you feel when I did that to you? I'm sure that really hurt.
I felt really disrespected. Yeah. So you can see how that interaction is important to call that out in this process of forgiveness.
And I just want you to know, so now you want to reiterate your sincerity. So you've now told them that you recognize the issue, you've heard their heart and how bad it hurt them, and now you need to reestablish that you are sorry and sincere in your apology.
Yeah.
So Ted, I just want you to know that, like, I hear that you feel disrespected, and I'm so sorry that hurt you. I just can't believe that I hurt you in that way.
Yeah. And then I think it's asking for feedback. And this is part of this is coming from the place of how can I do this differently next time, right? Because forgiveness, it is for that moment, for that situation, but ultimately as a couple, we want to be growing, we want to be learning, we want to be able to do things differently. So asking, what does that look like in the relationship? How can I, going forward, not re-offend in this particular way?
And I think the key to that too is checking your own heart motivation. Why did Mary get to that place where she was cussing and saying those things? What was going on in her heart and her emotions? So next time when she starts to feel like she's getting to that place, she can say, hey, you know what? I think I need a minute to process because I'm getting pretty heated and we're hitting on something here that I need to step back and process. And I know that takes a lot of maturity and it's really hard to do. And for us, it took us years of practice, honestly, to get to that place. But we can tell you that it's possible to learn how to do that. And in Oxygen that we have through Stronger Families, we have a thing called a couple log that's amazing for this. So reach out to us and we can send you some more on that. But just really also looking at what caused you to get to the place where you were hurting somebody in that way. If there's infidelity, what in the world would have caused to get to that place? Like in your marriage, in your heart personally, there's a lot of questions to ask for self-awareness around forgiveness.
Yeah.
So.
And then I think that this next is the most critical step if you're asking for forgiveness. And it is being in the moment and understanding that this process, though you might want to ask for it, they might not be ready for it. And so if you think there's going to be this, sense of like, oh yeah, I'm so glad that you asked for forgiveness. Absolutely, I forgive you.
Yeah, not always.
That might not happen. And then and if you have the expectation that that's what's going to be the outcome, you can derail everything that we've talked about so far in terms of actually moving forward as in your relationship. So be in tune with the moment. Like, what is that? It might be that they need time to go and process and they might not be saying thank you for extending forgiveness.
Because just because you ask for it doesn't mean they're ready to give it, right? They might not be prepped and ready in their heart to do that. So it's a recognition of that, as well as forgiveness. So sometimes forgiveness is asking for it and not receiving it on the other end. And that even takes more strength and courage to be able to do that. So, and I think I just saw a quote recently that hit me so hard, you guys, and this is how you know in your life if you haven't truly forgiven someone. And it's, if you don't heal what's hurt you, then you will bleed on those who didn't cut you. Let me say that again. If you don't heal what hurt you, you will bleed on those who didn't hurt you and didn't cut you. And an example of that in my life with my grandmother was for years when I was younger, when I was left out of things, I would have a certain emotional reaction, and it was very strong with friends, or parties that were being had and I wasn't invited to. And it took me a while, and actually just recently, where it really resonated with me, like, oh my gosh, this is going back from hurt that I had years ago that has really nothing to do with these situations. It's more about me, but I'm bleeding on other people because I haven't been healed in this area. So I had to take it on myself to get healed. And so often you see things where people are running around, and you at your workplace, in your home, just in so many ways, other people are paying the price for our hurts and wounds in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it is so crucial that you get the counseling, that you get the healing, that you read the books to get you to the place where you can get healing. And one of those for me, a huge mentor in my life is Brene Brown. She doesn't know me, but she's my mentor. But like one book that I would highly recommend for everyone to read would be called The Gift of Imperfections by Brene Brown. And it's a transformative work.
Yeah. I think one of the things that gets missed in this process, especially if you're the one that's asking for forgiveness, which means you're the one that offended, is this idea of letting yourself off the hook. We can carry around our own guilt, our own shame about the situation. And I've seen too many couples fall into this where it was a big ticket item, right? And yet they're still, years later, they're still harboring that on themselves. They're still, in a sense, that shame is just settled in and it's become their identity rather than being freed up and being able to live out of that. So let yourself off the hook is such a huge part of this. Understand that it's the process that needs to happen.
Well, and also too, like with that forgiveness of yourself, sometimes is what we've heard too, is they've forgiven you already and you keep bringing it up because you can't let yourself off the hook. And at some point that's where you need to sit down as a couple and be like, what can I do to give you that assurance that you are forgiven? Whether you hold them by the face and say, I love you, I forgive you. Like anytime that's brought up, like you need to forgive yourself. But if that's happening in a relationship, it probably is an indicator that you need that person, whoever keeps bringing it up, needs to go talk to a professional and deal with some of the shame and guilt around that area.
Yeah. Well, this topic, there's so many layers to it. There's so many layers. 30 minutes trying to unpack it all. Hopefully this has been a starting point for you. We've also included this month some great meetup questions that I think will help you go deeper to help begin to open up the dialogue as a couple. We also have a date night we put together around this topic of forgiveness, which I think is, starting from a place of, we've got to deal with that. But then how do we begin to warm up to each other again? Like if there's been a lot of hurt, how do we move through forgiveness and then begin to create the romance again? So we've got a date night that's specific to forgiveness. We're super excited about you taking part in that. You can find all this at strongerfamilies.com. Please let us know if there's ways that we can help you. Give us feedback. You can actually, right here in the chat, it's Q&A. Put your questions in there and our team will get back to you. Any final thoughts?
No, just thanks for being there and for being brave and for pushing in, because it's worth it. Forgiveness is so worth it. So hard sometimes, but it's so worth it. And we're cheering you on here at Stronger Families. And we have a bunch of podcasts and other tools for you to tap into to help in your relationship and your family at strongerfamilies.com.
Thanks.
Thanks.